Welcome to the Curling for Change podcast. My name is Will Robertson, and I will be your host for this limited series, brought to you by Curling Canada and sponsored by the World Curling Federation. Without further ado, let's get right into today's discussion. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Curling for Change podcast. My name is Will Robertson, and I'm joined by a number of guests here today to speak on the issue of accessibility in curling, but also to tell some stories that we may not have heard in curling as much and share some lessons with you on a number of different issues. And I hope that you enjoy and benefit from the conversation, as I'm sure it'll be impactful and insightful. If you do enjoy the conversation, whether you're on YouTube or Curling Canada Plus, do please share the video with folks you know and spread some of the important messages that our guests will have, but also anything that resonates with you. That's always greatly appreciated. So I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. I'll get Carly to start, please.
I'm Carly Smith. I live in Fredericton. I currently curl out of Fredericton at the Capital Winter Club. I've been curling for 13 years, and I plan on to continue.
All right, welcome, Carly. John.
Thanks, Will. I'm John Thurston. I live in Dunsford, Ontario. I curl out of the Peterborough Curling Club and also the Bobcaygeon Curling Club. I've been curling for 11 years and have been on the national team representing Team Canada since 2019.
All right, fantastic. Welcome, Holly.
Hi, I'm Holly Mashmeyer. I'm from Witterheim, Alberta, and I curl out of the Lamont Curling Club. And I've been curling for about 20 years. I've been to World Juniors and then have been to the Worlds for Deaf Curling.
All right, welcome, Emma.
Thanks, Will. I'm Emma. I am based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, curling at the Halifax Curling Club. I've been curling for 15 years. I represented Nova Scotia at the Scotties in 2020 and 2021. And I joined Holly at the Worlds just this last year in Banff for deaf curling.
All right, I think we have a good, amazing set of guests here to speak on this. So thank you all for taking the time, and I really appreciate it, as I know many people watching or listening do as well. We're always interested to hear how folks kind of came to the sport of curling, how you found it, and what your reaction may have been to it. So Emma, do you want to start? How did you find the sport of curling?
Sure. I would think my story is not very unique. It's a very common one in the curling world, which is that a family connection brought me into the sport. So for curlers out there, you would know my aunt, Marianne Arsenault. She is a 2-time world champion, 5-time Scotties champion. So big idol of mine on the ice and at home too. She and I are very close, so it was a no-brainer to start curling at the age of 11 by her suggestion. It's honestly a surprise I didn't start sooner, but it was better later than never. And it's been so much fun. And a highlight of my curling career has been playing with her. So she was my teammate at my first Scotties appearance, and yeah, a big inspiration of mine, teammate, coach, and family member. So that's how I started.
Oh, love that. I've met Marianne a number of times at the curling camps in Moncton, and probably one of the most wonderful human beings you could curl with. So great to have that experience as well. John, how did you find the sport of curling?
Yeah, I didn't have anybody, any family members or anything that curled. So I was, it was actually a member of my community that reached out. So I was injured in 2008. So I've been using it in a wheelchair since then. And just my local paper, I've been doing news articles on me during my recovery. This gentleman reached out. He was coaching a wheelchair curling competitive team at the time, and found me and got me out to try it. And yeah, there was a junior camp going on in Minden, and I just threw a couple rocks for an hour and said I'd try it out for a season playing with them and see if I liked it. And we ended up winning provincials the first year and going to nationals, and I was hooked for there.
That's one way to get hooked for sure. That's always an interesting one, especially for people who get to come to curling and get to provincials or nationals that way. It's always a great way to find the sport and then find excellence in it too. So that's fantastic. Holly, how did you find the sport of curling?
Well, my parents curled, no surprise there. But I definitely spent some evenings in the curling rink just watching while they played on the ice. But growing up, I did try a lot of different sports, and then curling was one that just kind of stuck.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Carly, how did you find the sport of curling?
Well, my mom was a curler. She curled in high school. So she got me into it at a very young age. I was only 7, and I started in the Little Rocks program, which was super, super awesome. I had tons of fun. But when I started playing competitively, that's when I really fell in love with the sport, I'd say, and like winning provincials and stuff like that. Like, and going to nationals and being the first amputee to play in an able-bodied national event was just like mind-blowing for me. And I just like also loved the sport so much that it was perfect. So I'm continuing to play, and yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I've been very lucky. Carly and I are both from Moncton, New Brunswick, and kind of came through juniors together. So I've been very lucky to see you come through that journey as well, and see you do unbelievable things at nationals and at that kind of excellent stage, and get, well-deserved attention for your success, but also inspiring others. And that's been amazing to watch happen. I have one quick question before we get to the other one. We've had a couple of times where folks who didn't have the family connection to curling found it particularly hard, perhaps getting into the sport or kind of being welcomed into the sport. John, I'm just wondering if you may have had a similar experience in not having that family connection to curling.
It's a great question, Will. I felt like Carl. So the gentleman that got me into it was Carl Rennick, longtime curler and a longtime coach. So he was a very good conduit to introduce me to the sport. And then I was very fortunate that I started curling at the Peterborough Curling Club my first year. It was the only accessible club in my area. And there was already 2 wheelchair curlers that curled out of that club at the time. So I was very fortunate they could kind of show me the ropes and, teach me about the game, but also about different ways that they manage accessibility in the club. And so I was very fortunate that way. And then the members were, I think that the 2 previous to me kind of broke the ice already and were familiar with wheelchair curlers. So I think it helped me. And so I just kind of got to follow under the path they'd already blazed, if you will.
Okay, interesting. It's nice to hear that kind of welcoming experience into that, but also having folks around you to help you kind of be introduced to curling and kind of show you the ropes, as you put it. So one of the things we always are most interested in, or I'm always most interested in this podcast, is hearing people's experiences and trying to, enable folks to learn from them and see what lessons we can take from them. So I would ask you to share an experience that maybe disappointed you more, and one that might have inspired or empowered you more. And if you have other experiences you want to share, then absolutely feel free to. I was just wondering, Holly, if you wanted to start.
Sure. So yeah, instead of focusing on a distinctive, disappointing experience, I kind of have generalized it into just an overarching experience looking back in hindsight, that now that I've reflected on it, I feel like it kind of was disappointing. Fortunately, I've had a lot of success with curling with under 18 and under 21. But so for a backstory, I wear 2 hearing aids. I'm hard of hearing. I do really well lip reading, and I do quite well for the degree of hearing loss that I have. I have about a severe to profound hearing loss bilaterally. And so growing up, I learned that you can't use technology on the ice, like a personal microphone, for example, Whereas in school, in the classroom, my teacher would wear an FM system. Their voice would go directly to my hearing aids and I could hear them really well. But for curling, I just accepted that you don't do that on the ice. So I made it work. But I've learned since meeting Emma that you can make exceptions. I'll let her talk about that. But I know that even if I did get an exemption, there is still 4 people on the team. And if you have 1 microphone, how do you decide who wears it if you can't hear the other 3 people? The other factor is that the curling rink itself, the acoustics are terrible. It's very loud, very reverberant. Sometimes women are screaming at the top of their lungs, calling line, or there's some really deep voices that also just carry, and that's all you hear. With hearing aids, they don't restore your hearing to normal, so they can't distinguish speech from noise. And so with the distance and the background noise, it is really challenging to communicate on ice. So I think for me, the overall disappointing experience is not advocating for my needs more, especially in university. I think when you get to a certain competitive level, it's much harder to get by based on just context clues and guessing what they're saying. Because I learned that I missed a lot of information that I had no idea I had missed. And like, you don't know what you don't hear. So I think it's just that I walked away not fully feeling like I accessed everything.
Okay. And did you have any particular experience that may have kind of empowered you more, or was it, through your curling career?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of great teammates and coaches, and but what was really empowering was meeting 3 deaf women, and I was welcomed into the deaf community. It was intimidating at first because I was just learning American Sign Language, or known as ASL. But we were able to come up with curling specific signs, like for signaling to sweep or to clean or hard line, switch. And it just felt like there's more communication on the ice, more access, and it was more specific, rather than just like green tape for sweep, red tape for stop, because there's more information than that. But it's been 9 years now since I've been with the deaf community and with the deaf stream. And I do have to say it's been an amazing journey of growth, not just for myself and my own identity, but just within athletes who are deaf and hard of hearing. And I feel like there's this growing awareness around our invisible disability and just an improved general knowledge of others, that it's becoming more aware of what our communication and needs are.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Just before I carry on, I was just wondering if the changes you mentioned that you advocate for now that you weren't able to perhaps when you curled more competitively at the time, in terms of helping those who are hard of hearing hear better in curling, has that ever been changed to be better now for a 4-person team as opposed to 1 exception, or has there been any movement on that since then? Or
So I'm not sure what you're asking.
so you mentioned how there might be one exception, or there might be an allowance for a speaker or a personal hearing device to help you hear things better and on the ice, like there is in a classroom setting, as you mentioned. Has that been changed to be better now for the curling community, or?
Oh, yes. Yeah, with Curling Canada, you can apply for an exemption. Emma has more details on that.
Sure.
I haven't physically done that, but it does start at the community and making sure your team and your coach can support you, and you have to decide what works best for you, because you meet 1 deaf person, you've only met 1 deaf person, because every single one of us is different. But maybe Emma, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. This actually ties really well into my experiences, both from the disappointing side of things and the inspiring moments. And the disappointing time came from, it was in 2019. So I had just joined my aunt's team or as a full-time player. I was the 5th beforehand, but has stepped into the lead position, which was a very big deal for me to be playing side by side with my aunt. And this would be what we knew would be the only year we would get together as teammates, because she had plans to leave at the end of the year to live out west. So it was our one shot to go to the Scotties together. So a lot of stakes on the line, a big goal to reach. But the team had been successful together before my joining. So there was, we knew we could put in the work to make it happen, but that was not going to be easy work by any means. And one of the biggest challenges we faced in the beginning was communication, which is something that every team faces with a new player, but it's just so much, it's exacerbated with somebody with a hearing loss, because we're now trying to figure out how to fill that gap of what I cannot hear, alongside of just how do we gel together and how do we communicate in a way that's seamless and makes us that well-oiled machine that every team is working towards. So it was in the first half of the season before Christmas that we had played in a tournament, and it was very tricky ice condition. No two paths were alike, so it really put our communication skills to a test. And I would say we failed that weekend. Communication was very broken. At this point, we did have the microphone introduced on the ice. So I'll give my first shout out to Carol McLean. She was my coach at the time and a huge advocate for myself as a player, and helped me realize achievements and moments in curling I would not have otherwise without her support. And she was the one that actually brought forward the idea of introducing the microphone on the ice, because it was something that I felt odd about. I had never seen or heard of it being done before, and likely because it had not. And it felt almost like I was cheating. It was technology, and technology in sport has historically been taboo, but I think it's becoming more normalized, and it's enhancing our sport in a lot of ways, and especially in the light of accessibility. So Carol reminded me that with the microphone, I was not going to be ahead of my hearing teammates. I'm still having to work so much harder than they are to hear information. So the microphone was just going to be an extension of my hearing devices and would help me keep up. It would give me a chance essentially to keep up with my teammates. But we initially started out having it on Marianne as our skip in the house, thinking that was the obvious break in communication, not hearing if I need to sweep or not. But that weekend, really, we were not where we wanted to be. I was still missing a lot of calls. The microphone would cut in and out because it's really not made for the length of a curling sheet. It's meant to be for personal conversations in like a restaurant setting, for example. So I walked out of that weekend feeling very defeated. We had a challenging weekend as a team, but I felt extra fatigued on a personal level and emotional level, feeling like I wasn't part of the team conversation and on the ice, and it felt extra frustrating than what I had been used to. And I remember calling Carol, and it was my first time that I thought I would actually quit curling due to my deafness. And it was the first time I felt that being deaf was going to stop me from doing something that I really wanted, which is a privileged thing to say. Like I grew up with facing it as a barrier to overcome, but I was very fortunate to be well supported by my community, my family, my school environment, to make sure I had access to equal opportunities. So this was the first time I felt it was going to pull me away from something I was very passionate about. But Carol said to me on this phone call that I expressed this realization. She said, it's not a hearing loss problem, it's a team communication problem. We need to figure out what's going to work for you, and we will do just that. And I didn't believe her at first. I just felt defeated in the moment, but we get back out in the ice, we talk about what worked and didn't work. And it was my teammate who then was my front end sweeper with me, who said, are you hearing anything that I'm saying to you as we're sweeping down the ice? And Holly said it earlier, but you don't know what you don't hear. So my first response was, yeah, like I think so. But then we tested it. She said, let's do a practice shot. And then I want you to repeat everything I say after the fact. And sure enough, I couldn't repeat a single thing she said. And it was this big aha moment of like, that's where the break in communication is. It was actually in the sweeper to sweeper banter. So we then flipped the mic to my partner sweeper, Jen Baxter, who then it just opened up a whole new world to me. I realized that up until that moment, I was very isolated in my sweeping decisions and communication, but flipping it, we were able to lean more on the visual cues from Marianne and the verbal cues from Jen as my partner sweeper, and it totally changed the game for me from a hearing curling perspective.
Oh, that's an incredible story. Thank you for telling it. I'm just like, I heard a couple of really important support systems there for you, both from your coach, but also Marianne and your teammates, you know, from the microphone perspective, but also working with you to try and make sure what you were hearing, what you weren't, and what was working and what wasn't. Like how critical and important was that to you to have those supports? And, you know, you mentioned you came close to thinking about quitting curling because it was very defeating in that sense. You know, if you hadn't had those supports and people who are willing to work with you in that way and really make an effort to do that, do you feel that you may have still felt defeated in that sense?
So yeah, to answer your question of how important it is, it was absolutely crucial to my continued participation in the sport and enjoyment in the sport, because I've always said that the moment I'm not enjoying curling is the moment I'll quit, because it is at the end of the day a game that we all play because we love it and we have fun doing it. And that was the first time it didn't feel like fun. It felt like work, and it felt like I was putting more effort into it than I was feeling the reward of it. It was draining me on such a deeper, more emotional level that it was sucking the fun out of it for me at the time. So having those support, both from my team level, family level, and from my coach, it was what brought the fun back in the game for me, because it made me feel included again. And our team also started finding success again. Like it certainly helped that once the communication improved, that we started winning. That was when we won provincials, and I got to represent Nova Scotia at the Scotties for the first time, which was, you know, my childhood dream come true. It's you know, every curler's dream to play at that level, and I am very, very lucky to have had that experience. And truthfully, I have goosebumps right now, because I would not have made it there had I not had the support around me who kept me in the game and kept it fun for me, was the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It speaks to the importance of that support from folks around you in the curling community to ensure that you can access it in the way that you need to continue in the sport and to continue to enjoy it, but also excel. And that's something that goes across the entire curling community. You know, if we're going to try and be inclusive of everybody or of different communities, then we need to make sure that we have those supports in place and that mindset, right? To be where you are and ask, well, what do you need, right, in order to come and be part of the curling community. So I appreciate that a lot for you telling that story. John, what were some experiences for you that stand out?
Yeah, I have to say the majority of my experiences have been positive. So I will get my general disappointment or kind of negative experience would just be not having accessibility. So I mean, if a club's not accessible, it's basically a non-starter. Like I can't even get in the front door. Then, you know, that's disappointing, whether it's going to watch a competition or you know, whether, I mean, they wouldn't book our wheelchair competition there, but yeah. So I think continuing to try and push for more accessibility and more and more clubs. I'm very fortunate right now. When I started curling, I had one curling club that was accessible around me, and now I have three in the 11 years I've been curling. So I feel very lucky. It's not it's not that way for other wheelchair curlers around the country, to have, 3, let alone one accessible club that's within a reasonable driving distance. So I feel very fortunate that way. And then the positives, lots of positives, but I think, I got to represent Canada at my first Paralympics in 2022, and we got really good exposure for our sport, for our discipline. And it was, some of the amazing experiences was just coming back and seeing people that shared that journey with us. Stayed up, did double shift where they stayed up all night watching our games live, and even, people that weren't curlers themselves or hadn't necessarily seen wheelchair curling before, and they were just hooked, right? Like they loved it and they followed us all the way. And to hear those experiences from, whether it was fellow members of my club or other fans across Canada, it was pretty cool. And to get that exposure for wheelchair curling, to spread that throughout Canada, and it was pretty amazing. So those would be 2 for me.
No, that's amazing. And I think a bit about my curling experience in Atlantic Canada, but also some of the experiences of others across the country where we're still working very hard to make clubs accessible, particularly wheelchair accessible. There's a number still, as you mentioned quite rightly, that are not accessible to folks. I was just wondering if you could articulate, maybe for some of your teammates or other folks in the community who may have to travel a further distance to curl, right? You said you were lucky you had a club that's accessible to you, but what are some of the distances that you might have to travel if there isn't a accessible curling club in your vicinity?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I know there were some fellow curlers in Quebec that would drive 3 hours to get together and practice together, and like that's like, and to do that, maybe to do that once a week. But if you really want to make gains and be competitive, then you probably got to do it more than once a week. And so yeah, it makes it challenging. But I think it's great. Like, I think we are, like I'm saying, like I have 3 clubs around me that are accessible, and there are some great efforts that are being made across the country to become accessible. And there's been some great efforts that the clubs near me that did, like, I started curling in Peterborough, but shortly after I started curling in Bobcaygeon, they weren't accessible, but they had, they were very supportive. They still are very supportive, but they made it accessible. They put a ramp at the back door so I could get in the ice and curl, like, so I could practice. So they gave me an extra opportunity to get practice ice. So they did that while they worked on making an accessibility plan, and it took a few years to get that done. I understand it's a lot of money to make a club accessible. There's a lot that goes into it. So those are understandable, but I think it's the being able to get creative and figure out ways to make it accessible, in the interim while accessibility plans are being figured out. And I think a lot of that is happening, and it's great to see. And I think also just continuing to share information, like what funding's out there and that, and because curling clubs feel it very daunting when they get kind of what the number would be to make a club accessible, and certainly knowing where funding sources are and when to apply certainly helps with accessibility initiatives.
Yeah, it's a great perspective to hear the progress that's been made, and importantly across the country, but also how far we still have to go to make our curling clubs accessible and our sport more broadly more accessible. It's a whole effort, from the national level, but also from our provincial level at the associations and at a local level, in that kind of ingenuity and that creativity that you mentioned as well. Carly, what are your experiences?
Yeah, so I was born missing my left arm above the elbow. And when I started curling, like it was a totally welcoming space. And like I didn't feel different and I felt really comfortable around other people who had all their arms. But all the coaches that I've had have been really great. And I haven't really had really terrible experiences, but there was one time because I started off curling with no devices, just like with my one hand, and I would tuck the broom under my armpit to sweep. And I would just throw using nothing and no stabilizer or broom to throw. And it began to become difficult when I started competitively because I wanted to put more weight on the broom while sweeping, but I was having issues with chafing up against my side because I had had the broom tucked in so tightly to my armpit, and I couldn't sweep, I don't know, in a horizontal way, I guess. I was always like behind the rock type of thing. So I kind of got in the way sometimes. So I worked with a lot of people to develop a solution to my sweeping problem. And I actually ended up going to my prosthetist in the end. And he and my occupational therapist, after teaching them a lot about the sport and like what the demands were for like sweeping, and like I didn't want to fall on my face and all this stuff, and I wanted to be able to put weight on the broom and all this. So after teaching them a lot about the sport, they developed a shorter prosthesis compared to like my regular one that I would wear on a daily basis, whereas it's the same length as my right arm. And they put an attachment on the end of it, and it's like a little swivel and it's rubber, so there's no way that it can fall off the broom once I put it on there. So that was really comforting because there's been like other developments in the past that hadn't been reliable and there were falls. And so it's really important to be able to trust your equipment. And like, so when I finally got that arm, I felt super like safe in it. So, and also like I could sweep normally now. So it really like made a difference in my game as well. Like my strength on the broom, and I play mate. So there, I do a lot of sweeping, and also just like in the house, like I can hold the broom with the device and then have my stopwatch in my right hand. So it just made like the biggest difference, and it was awesome. But I was still throwing without any broom or stabilizer at this point. And the disappointing part was in provincials, and this was a provincials, I think, after I had won my first provincials. So I wasn't new to like the competitive community or anything like that. And we were in the semifinal game. So like we've been playing all weekend, and nothing with the players. I've never had any issues with other players, but oddly enough, it was the umpire who made a comment to me. I was in the hack. I was throwing my second rock in the seventh end, I believe it was. And all focused up. I was about to raise my hips and push out. And then he says to me, "You can't throw without a broom." And I was just like, is that real? Like turn around, and I was like, what? And then he says, "You can't throw without a broom." And I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. I can't throw with a broom. So and he ended up just walking away, and I threw my rock. But like at this point I was flustered. I was like in tears. I was like, no one has ever said that to me in years of my curling career. And it was just like weird that it had to come from the umpire. And so I threw my rock, and then my skip kind of like went over to him and was like, that's not okay to say to her. You need to apologize and all this stuff. And he never ended up apologizing or anything, but it was just a moment for me that was like, oh, like I guess I knew I was different, but I didn't think it was a rule to be different or stuff like that. So, but the empowering part of my story would have to be in years to come, like years after that. Actually last season, my line started to get a little iffy, like growing and like balance and stuff like that. So my coach like mentioned, like, maybe you should talk to your prosthetist and your occupational therapist again about maybe developing a device that you could use to throw the rock with. So I was like, yeah, that's a good idea, because my line is not doing well right now and I need to be on target. So sure enough, I went over to them and they are complete geniuses and they developed this. So I have the same sweeping device, but they developed a interchangeable wrist attachment. So again, I had to like tell them like this needs to be a quick switch from sweeping to throwing, because in competition you're timed and have no extra time to pause. I need to switch my arm. So so they developed a lock that I literally just have to press a button. It releases really quickly, and then they made it's kind of like a metal pipe, and it has like a Lego hand on the bottom of it that attaches to a stabilizer. So I take the sweeping device off with a quick press of a button and click that pipe into the prosthetic, and then I can throw. So it's really amazing how they developed that so quickly. Like I still like am mind blown by them and all their work that they do for amputees, but just to like have people like that who can adapt to your sport and your needs. Like if I needed anything, they could whip something up for me. But so that was probably the most empowering thing, because after I got that throwing attachment, like I never felt more like, it sounds weird to say, like an able-bodied person. Like being disabled your whole life, you're always like, oh, like I wonder what it would feel like to have two arms. Well, like that really gave me the experience of like being able to feel like have that feeling of like, wow, this is what it feels like, and I'm just like everyone else, and I can do anything I want. And yeah, so that would probably be my take on that question.
No, thank you for sharing that, Carly. I think that there's a lot of important points throughout that story. Wow, I think I remember some of these because being in New Brunswick, I remember that happening at provincials, and the community response was everybody was upset about it outside of that situation, right, to support you. And I also remember the first time folks started working on a prosthetic for you.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I was really kind of inspired by the communal nature of the sport of curling, was seeing folks at a curling camp in Moncton who had,
right,
90% of them didn't know who you were.
Yeah.
Willing to talk about like, how can we help make curling more comfortable for you? And how can we make this better for you? And I kind of just sat there at the end of the day and going, it's a pretty good sport we got.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I left that part out of the story, but at that camp there were multiple people that came up to me, and one worked for a university and had engineering students, and she was like, maybe we could like try to make you something. And their take on it was a Velcro like a sling that would attach to my broom for sweeping. And then Rachel Holman had some ideas when she came as a guest at that camp, and she tried to help me out as well. And Emma Miskew helped me with my sweeping technique at that camp. Like that camp was awesome, and that's really where it rooted from, like the need for something to make me be able to perform better in my sport.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again for sharing that. It's been really interesting to hear all of your experiences, that a lot of them stem around community being part of the reason why you stayed or were able to be kind of enabled to curl more comfortably or more accessibly in your community, in your club, in the sports that you play and that you're involved in, because without a communal effort and without that support from folks at the curling club, folks from your association, people around curling or outside of it, it's so much more difficult to actually access the game and to stay in it. And that's yeah, and that's a lesson that we've heard in a few different conversations, but really important to highlight it here as well. So it is the Curling for Change podcast, and so we're always really interested in the change aspect of it. So I wanted to know what some lessons that all of you have for the curling community and how we can make curling more accessible and more inclusive to everyone, and what we can do to change the face of curling, but also make our sport more welcoming and open to everyone. John, did you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think I think I'd say it's probably exposure. I think it's with a lot of para sports, it's just not a lot of people know what's available and where it is available to try, I would say, or to see somebody in the case of wheelchair curling, curling in a wheelchair somewhere. So there's been some really great efforts the last few years to do some give it a try days, to get people out to try it, trying to reach out to the wheelchair community. We had a really good push from the national program this past year. We actually have, I think it's 21 athletes in the national program. We went from 7 to 21, so including like the next gen development athletes. So it was pretty great efforts that came out and got a lot of people out to try it. And I think it's continuing with those efforts. I think it's one of the one of the thought processes, I think, is when you'd perhaps have a wheelchair curler in a club that maybe members haven't seen before, is maybe they'd affect the pace of play or affect the game in some way. And I think until you actually curl with somebody in a wheelchair and realize that they can keep up and they can give you a good run for your money, then I think it's everybody, it's just that if you don't know and trying to figure out ways you can help and stuff. And so yeah, I think just trying to get exposure, trying to get people out to try it, just getting other fellow curlers that haven't seen wheelchair curling before exposed to it. I think those are all good efforts to continue to push to get more people into trying curling and fall in love with the sport that we all did.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to hear that progress as well from the national team level. That's incredible to see that growth in that short a period of time as well. Holly, what are some lessons you have for the curling community?
Yeah, well, this whole conversation kind of has the main word access, but for Emma and I, it's more about communication access versus physical access. So with being deaf or hard of hearing, it's really important to have accommodations that allow us access to auditory information. And there's a couple of things that curling clubs can consider. That's acoustics, whether that's inside the rink or outside of it, whether it's in the dressing rooms, the tables and chairs upstairs. When they have banquets, often there's music playing or the lights are off. That's really challenging if we're trying to lip read who's at the table. We can't see their faces very well if there's no lighting. You could consider making alternate seating so that there's a space that some people can go to that has better lighting, that's further away from the speakers, that could be easier to have a conversation and then still accommodate everyone that's there to party and hang out and socialize as a typical hearing person manner, so to speak. But with, say, announcements or meetings before a competition starts, often they have someone talking on a microphone. It's good if they can have maybe handouts of the rules or any rule changes or emails, someone that can maybe take notes or someone that can tell you one-on-one afterwards, some of the highlights that are important. If there's any closed captioning on videos or automated captioning, that's an awesome asset. There's a lot of technology now that personal cell phones have automated live captioning. So that's super exciting for us. It's relatively new. One of the positives of the pandemic happening is the access has been a lot better. And another is with the leagues, sometimes they have a buzzer to say, okay, just finish this end, play one more. If you can't hear the buzzer, often you rely on the other team telling you the time's up. So maybe if they had a visual system to kind of help for that, because not everyone can accommodate or advocate for you and tell you what you've missed. And it's good if you're doing a meeting, if the people can repeat or paraphrase what other people in the crowd are asking or saying. If they're answering a question, it's great if they answer it, but it's great if we know what they were asking. And so things like that. My biggest thing is that SLU inclusion doesn't just mean being invited to the club or being part of the banquet. It's being able to fully hear and understand and access what's going on. And if you can't hear and understand, that's not true inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's kind of the same for fully deaf people that use American Sign Language. An interpreter, having an interpreter there is a great first step, but SLU inclusion is if everyone knew sign language. So it's just kind of the steps to kind of get there. And yeah, just the access to auditory information is the big one.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Holly, because I think that gives a lot of real tangible things that anybody can work towards to make sure that they're more inclusive and welcoming of people who are deaf or hard of hearing in their clubs or just in life. I think that's a really good set of examples. So thank you for that. Carly, what lessons did you have for folks?
Well, I think that we as athletes who live with disabilities and perform with disabilities have a responsibility to just promote our sport and like that, show people that it is possible to do so with our disabilities, because a lot of people can get discouraged when they have disabilities and stuff and don't want to engage in sport and stuff like that. So I think if we show people that we can do it, they can be like, oh, wow, well, I should try that. I can do it, because like you can really do anything you set your mind to. There's a little boy in Newfoundland who has one arm also, and his mom's a huge curling fan. And when she saw that I was curling, then she contacted like her prosthetist or his prosthetist and was like, well, can you make something that would help him? Because I would love to see him curl and he loves watching it and all this. And now he has a device also and he curls. And then just like seeing me do it, he was like, oh, this is possible. So just like Holly and Emma and John, like if you guys just promote it, someone's going to see it and someone's going to be inspired and they're going to get involved right away.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard about that recently and was rather inspired by it. So thank you for sharing that, Carly. Last but certainly not least, Emma, what the lessons do you have for folks watching or listening?
Thank you, Will. I love this whole conversation, first of all, and I think we put a lot of emphasis on that accessibility piece and the inclusion piece as well. And I'll say that the biggest thing is awareness. This podcast is an amazing step forward. It was a huge honor to be asked to participate in this. So thank you, Will, for providing the space and the conversation. And I'm inspired by the three also on this call. Carly, I remember playing against you before you had a device, and it was inspiring then. And it's really amazing to hear more background and story to who you are as an athlete.
Thank you.
So yeah, certainly the awareness. And it's one thing, you know, there was nothing that stopped me or prevented me from stepping onto the curling ice, but it was truly those who I was supported by. Carol is one that I highlighted as my coach, who made me feel included in the sport. And it really comes from a perspective shift in how we approach the sport that we play. It was built for, you know, the able-bodied person. And I think all of us have our different experiences and stories that showcase that it's really for everyone. So just changing perspectives so that people don't just feel they can come and play, but that they can show up and be included in one of the communities. So the inclusion part is what feels most important as a next step to first just getting people out. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Emma, for those kind words. Firstly, I appreciate all of you taking the time to come and have this conversation, but also to trust me to facilitate it as well. I understand that sometimes having someone you might not know as well facilitate a conversation that's as important and impactful as this can be a bit of a leap of faith. And thank you for doing that with me and for everyone who's listening and watching as well. And thank you to all of you for the advocacy you've done, the work you've done, but also, the important step that I think Carly highlighted really well there is that some of the barriers that you have faced and face and will continue to face are easing barriers for those behind you and for those younger than you. And that is powerful and important in so many ways. And there's so much work left to do. And I thank you for shedding some light to place my ignorance on the table. I don't know very much about this, and many other people may not know about some of the struggles we have with accessibility in curling, but also inclusion, particularly for those who struggle, whether it be with a physical disability or any kind of other disability in any way, shape, or form. But I wouldn't know a lot about that. I didn't encounter deaf curling until I moved to Ontario, to be blunt with you, really. And so it's been a really important conversation and learning experience to have all of you with me. So thank you for that. And thank you for all of your insights. I really appreciate it. And I hope the folks watching and listening did as well. If you did enjoy the conversation and if you did appreciate it, please do share it with someone you know. This has been another episode of Curling for Change. We'll be back with another one very soon. Thank you, and do take care. Thank you for watching this episode of the Curling for Change podcast, brought to you by the World Curling Federation and presented by Curling Canada. My name is Will Robertson, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you have, please do consider giving it a like, a share, or to subscribe on YouTube for future episodes. As always, you can find it in video every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern on Curling Canada Plus and on audio format wherever you find your podcasts, and will always come out for free on YouTube a week later. Take care, and I hope to see you in the next episode.